All right. Welcome everyone to this BCSPI Purchasing Power webinar discussion, where we're going to be exploring how procurement can help to address poverty. Before we get any further into this conversation, I want to acknowledge that I'm joining you today from the traditional, ancestral, and unceded territory of the Tla'amin First Nation, also known as Powell River. But that we have folks joining here from across traditional and unceded lands in the place we call Canada. So this Purchasing Power series is a series that features leaders exploring how local governments and institutions can use the power of purchasing to address the issues that matter in our communities. And like I said, today we're talking about how procurement can help to address poverty, which is absolutely a major challenge that our communities are facing. Before we dive in, I just want to give a bit more background about BCSPI, or the British Columbia Social Procurement Initiative, for folks who might not be familiar. So in British Columbia, local governments and other large purchasers spend billions of dollars each year on goods, services, and infrastructure projects. And by incorporating social procurement practices, this purchasing power could support the local economy, mitigate climate change, contribute to reconciliation, and provide many additional community benefits. Social procurement is growing as a best practice across Canada that aligns procurement dollars to the strategic objectives of governments and purchasers. And BCSPI aims to take this best practice thinking and approach to help build a more resilient and inclusive province through shared learning and capacity building. At this point, we have over 35 participating governments and organizations who really are what leads and drives the work that BCSPI does. And so far, our impact at a glance includes over 600 member staff trained, that we know of over $650 million in social procurement spend across members, and over 150 pilot projects taken. So today, we're really thrilled to be welcoming three great speakers to talk about this pressing topic. We have Jill Zacharias here from Tamarack's Vibrant Communities team. She's the BC Manager of Growth and Impact for Communities Ending Poverty at Tamarack Institute. Jill became interested in social sustainability while completing her post-baccalaureate diploma in community economic development at SFU. And for over a decade, Jill worked for the City of Revelstoke CED department as a social development coordinator. We also have here Susannah Cameron, who is the director and co-lead of EndPovertyEdmonton's Inclusive Economy Game Changer. She's worked in the community economic development sector in Toronto, Brandon, and Edmonton, and coordinated a microloan fund, supported the startup of social enterprises, and directed a National Association of Social Finance Organizations. And we also have here today Karen Bruno. Karen is the Director of Indigenization at EndPovertyEdmonton. She's Cree from the Meskwachis band, and she's worked for decades in Edmonton's inner city on the front line and as a manager for over 30 years, managing transitional housing, corrections officer, and worked as a consultant. Karen is also the former co-chair of the EndPovertyEdmonton Indigenous Circle. So really great to have the three fantastic speakers here today. And I'm going to stop sharing so we can get into our conversation. Wonderful. So this is obviously a very large conversation. Poverty is a massive issue, and the word itself can mean different things to different people. So just wanted to start off this conversation by asking all three of you how you define poverty. So Jill, can we start with you?
Great, thank you so much. I'm really excited to be here today. And just to start off, I'd like to say that as a settler and on behalf of a settler organization, I'm eternally grateful to be calling in from the unceded traditional territories of the Snipes, the Secwepemc, Ktunaxa, and Silks nations. So I just wanted to point out that until recent history, Canada had no single definition of poverty. I remember when I worked on a poverty reduction strategy for the City of Revelstoke, in 2011, there were only numbers, a low income cutoff that didn't quite equate with the real cost of living. So a small group of us worked very hard and we came up with our own definition, which was that individuals and families experiencing poverty lack the opportunity, financial and otherwise, to maintain a decent standard of living and to participate fully and with dignity in our community. So it wasn't until a few years later when the federal poverty reduction strategy that was released in 2017, that an official definition emerged that reflected the reality and context of living in Canada today. So in Opportunity for All, Canada's first poverty reduction strategy, poverty is described as the condition of a person who is deprived of the resources, means, choices, and power necessary to acquire and maintain a basic living standard needed to promote and facilitate integration and participation in society. So of course, this is a little bit more complicated, but the essence is the same. Beyond numbers, it's about whether or not we have the resources as Canadians to live life with dignity and to participate in our society. So also at Tamarack, we recognize that there are influential factors or game changers that impact a person's ability to function and be healthy in the world. Things like racism, housing, and food security that can be identified and directly aligned with systems like the social determinants of health and the UN Sustainable Development Goals. And so in BC here, the Together BC strategy outlines 4 foundational principles: affordability, opportunity, reconciliation, and social inclusion. So there really is a lot of foundational overlap in defining poverty and setting the context.
Mm-hmm. Thank you. Susannah, how do you define poverty at EndPoverty Edmonton?
Yeah, so Karen and I are colleagues at EndPoverty Edmonton, and our initiative's vision is to end poverty in 1 generation. One of the ways we're working to end poverty is to create economic opportunities for those living in poverty. Karen and I both and all our colleagues do a lot of coordinating and brokering of partnerships between people and community organizations, government, academic institutions, and industry. And we believe that if we have an economy in Edmonton that works for everyone, we'll have opportunities for people to access training, jobs, apprenticeships, to get higher pay, and to access business opportunities. And so when EndPoverty Edmonton started, 2015, 2016, there was a lot of engagements with thousands of Edmontonians. And the formal definition we came up with: poverty is complex, systemic, and deeply rooted. So finding solution involves the whole community, which is why one of the reasons we're involved in procurement, as well as many other initiatives. And Edmontonians experience poverty when they lack or are denied economic, social, cultural resources to have a quality of life that sustains and facilitates full and meaningful participation in the community.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, that's a great definition and lots of overlap between what both of you have said so far. Karen, anything you want to add to this conversation?
I like both definitions for sure. Those are pretty thorough definitions around poverty. From an Indigenous standpoint, we've, and as Susannah had mentioned when they did community consultation, the Indigenous community really talked about the word poverty. And it's not something that was originally recognized in our culture. Our culture was never meant to be poor. We had all the resources we needed at one time. And so, you know, as we define poverty, I guess we could come from a cultural, spiritual standpoint where I'll use my Cookum's definition. I remember we were walking down the street and she looked at a man and she said, "Oh, he's poor." And I said, "What do you mean poor?" he doesn't have a home or food. And she goes, no, he has no family. He has no one who loves him. He's always alone, that kind of thing. So it sort of gives you an essence of what poverty really means to us as Indigenous people. And it's a really lack of connection to the land, our language, our spirituality, and relationships. So yeah, that would be sort of a definition that I've learned throughout my life.
Mm-hmm. Thank you. Yeah, I think that really brings an important layer to the conversation about poverty for sure. And definitely acknowledging that we're having this conversation and you can't talk about these deep systemic issues without talking about racism, colonialism, reconciliation, like these big systems that are part of how poverty is shaped in our communities. Jill, I'd love if you could set the context for us a bit more of what's sort of the big picture of poverty and what's happening in Canada and BC right now, and how we need to start thinking about addressing this.
Well, thanks so much. So for the big picture, we really are living in unprecedented times. For the first time in history, the federal government has come on board with the Opportunity for All, the federal strategy. 2 years later, also for the first time in history, at a provincial level, after years and years of advocacy, we have Together BC, the provincial strategy. And also in BC, local governments and communities have had direct access to funding for planning and action at the community level through the UBCM Poverty Reduction Planning and Action Program. And other funders like the Vancouver Foundation Systems Change funding stream. So across the province, this has led to a plethora of planning and action around poverty reduction at a broader, more in-depth scale than ever before. And I just want to add too that I think that, with the calls to action and a focus on reconciliation, that's just such, as Canadians face truth, I think that's such an important big part of the big picture. And prior to the pandemic, other than certain populations, generally, we were doing really well. By 2019, the overall poverty rate in Canada had dropped to 10.3% from 14.5% in 2015. And by 2020, it had dropped even further to only 6.3%. But now we know that this low rate is likely artificial and due to the rollout of the CERB, the financial supports during the pandemic. And while the long-term impacts of the pandemic are not yet fully understood, and also here in BC, the climate emergencies, we know that these external factors have impacted certain populations more than others. So we know that certain populations are much more vulnerable to poverty, including racialized and Indigenous folks, single-parent families, people with disabilities, new immigrants, people experiencing mental illness, and so forth. Mm-hmm. So we also know that poverty in Canada is complex and systemic, and so our responses must be collaborative and holistic. At Tamarack, we have seen a real uptick in understanding the nature of poverty in communities and across the country as a whole, we're also we have better, more informed knowledge of what it is going to take to really address poverty. Mm-hmm. We know that change needs to happen. We know that when poverty exists, everybody is affected. So we also know that now communities have seen a real increase in food bank usage, which is an indicator of vulnerability. Organizations and institutions like local governments are facing staff turnover and burnout. Resources are stretched thin. So the current climate is complex. We know more, we see the road ahead, but there are new enduring challenges. And I just want to give you a couple of quotes here. So Paul Bourne, the co-founder of the Tamarack Institute, has always said, if what we were already doing was working, we would have ended poverty by now. So we know we need to do things differently. And Scott McAfee, the chair of the National Advisory Committee on Poverty, said that to start making these necessary changes, we must ask ourselves as a society why we accept that some of our fellow Canadians must live in poverty. Shouldn't we instead strive for the best version of Canada, where not one of us lives in poverty, where we all live with dignity, equity, and opportunity? And so I think there's this awareness, there's a drive, there's new knowledge, but there's a long ways to go.
Absolutely. Yeah. Thank you for that context. And I love what you're saying too about the collaboration that's needed. When we talk about social procurement a lot, we talk about how it kind of changes the traditional procurement process to break beyond the silos of, this is purely a financial transaction, to think about the other ways that these financial decisions impact communities. So I'd love to hear, Jill, a little bit more what you see as the connection between procurement and poverty and how local governments are taking this on right now.
So a really important aspect of addressing poverty is understanding what the contribution of everyone at the table is. And since local governments have this whole community mandate, firstly, it's vital to be at the table. So we just published a guide on 10 ways local governments can contribute or drive social change. And social procurement is one of those ways. It really is a case in point, showing what is possible when local governments get involved and how it can show leadership and how it can make a difference at the community level. So this is the connection. Local governments really need to be at the table. They need to look at all the tools that are in their toolbox in terms of what their contribution can be to the whole movement.
Thank you. Susannah, I'd love to ask you, EndPovertyEdmonton, you do work on social procurement with the city, but also with community. And what do you see purchasers need to think about when they're in that policy design stage or getting started on social procurement or procurement to address poverty?
Sure. So I'm assuming most of our audience is in British Columbia and maybe working already with the British Columbia Social Procurement Initiative, but we don't have that equivalent type of initiative in Alberta. However, we do work with BiSocial Canada a lot, who work with different municipalities across Alberta. And so we have taken on some of the similar roles to the British Columbia Social Procurement Initiative, although of course EndPovertyEdmonton as an initiative has a much broader mandate. So I'll recommend for those of you who are purchasers to really think about early community involvement in the planning and design of your social procurement policy, and also think about how you can get really broad participation from different stakeholders. So that includes community groups, labor, government, post-secondary, business, industry, and the associations that coordinate those bodies. And I'll just illustrate what we did in Edmonton. 2018, Edmonton City Council asked its administration to create a social procurement policy with the assistance of EndPovertyEdmonton. So it was great we were in on the ground floor. City Council saw it as an opportunity to involve the business community in our broader goal of ending poverty. And so they also engaged BiSocial Canada, and in talking to BiSocial Canada, we kind of learned that there were two opportunities for the city of Edmonton, both through the purchasing of goods and services, but also through the development of infrastructure and construction projects. And sometimes that takes the form of community benefit agreements. And then in Edmonton, we have Community Employment Benefit Initiative in conjunction with the development of our light rapid transit. So at the very beginning, we had workshops, connections with diverse-owned businesses, with social enterprises, with co-ops, just to talk about what is social procurement. Was a new concept then? What is it? What are the opportunities? We actually implemented a couple pilots with BiSocial Canada to actually test procurement And we really looked at the City of Edmonton social procurement framework and designed it so that we could have outcomes that would create opportunities for training and employment for targeted populations who have higher rates of poverty. We looked at purchasing from social enterprises and co-ops that might benefit the community. Looked at how the city could purchase from small and medium, local, diverse owned businesses that hire locally and that might pay a living wage. And we looked at increasing benefit to the community through the provision of space or other community services. So we passed that sustainable procurement policy with the social policy component passed in December 2019. So then I'll say, as a purchaser, when you're looking at your implementation plan, you need to think through how you're going to implement and how you're going to be accountable and how you're going to track and measure your social outcomes. You're going to need staff who are going to be point person and build relationships with suppliers in the community and people who can answer questions about procurement processes. And I think you really need to think about how you're going to reach, in particular, really smaller micro enterprises. We found in our experience that the larger companies have staff that might be dedicated to looking through requests for proposals and filling out all the sections of the procurement bid and ensuring that they are doing a good job. But the small businesses that you're trying to reach sometimes only have 1 or 2 staff. And it's really tricky for them to have the extra capacity and time to fill out those bids, but they might actually be the people you're trying to reach. So to really think through how you're going to reach those people, those business owners.
Yeah, absolutely. And we've heard things like, setting up coffees or meeting people face to face and going into small businesses in your community, especially if you're in a smaller community. That's a little easier to do.
Yeah.
Karen, I'd love to hear from you working with suppliers and businesses. What are some of the barriers to accessing procurement opportunities that you've seen?
Well, part of my role as the Director of Indigenization is to go out there and talk to some of the smaller businesses and, and have these conversations and connecting them, like Susannah had mentioned. But one of the things that, there was things that I heard quite loud and clearly, and Susannah mentioned it, the capacity to be able to go out there and, apply for these things. They're so busy making a living that none of them really have the time to take a day off or days off to do that. The other thing that I've heard is just being seen as stakeholders, never really being the leads or, being really engaged, just always being seen as stakeholders. It's something that in our community happens quite often. And then, being left out of development, policy process, systems that are, that need to be changed. There's lots of systems that are developed out there that are challenging. And I think, if we are able to be creative and come from a lens that looks for success and not failure, I think in business, Indigenous people have always been seen as looked at for their deficits and not through the lens of success. And creativity, in the bidding, and one of the things that I'll mention that I'm finding and hearing lots now, and it's really come together, is that non-Indigenous businesses really want to work with other Indigenous suppliers or businesses, but really don't know how to form those relationships. And they're afraid of offending. They don't know how to start. The want is there, but there's a real, I guess, fear of being vulnerable to the Indigenous community and having that power shift. And it's something that people are quite fearful of, for sure.
Mm-hmm. I really love what you're saying about that perspective shift away from deficit to success as being like a really important part of evaluation and the relationship building. So I'm curious, those are some of the barriers you're seeing. What are some best practices that you've seen, Karen, in terms of implementation for procurement?
Well, I'll talk again really quickly, and then I'll give an example of an actual example that I got to experience. But I'll talk about, coming from a four-direction approach, that success, and starting off in that good way is by looking at relationships, co-creating, looking at how we govern ourselves a little bit more differently. We use a very Western model on how we govern ourselves in business, but Indigenous people have other ways of governing ourselves. It's a little bit more creative or out of the box. Looking at the talents of everybody, our gifts, our talents, those are sort of that lens of success. And these things I realize take a bit longer, but the end result is extraordinary, and it's a win-win for everybody. And now I'll give that example. Like in the introduction, I was the co-chair for the Indigenous Circle, and the Indigenous Circle, one of the things that they really wanted to do that was very loud and clear with the Edmonton community is to have an Indigenous Cultural Wellness Center. And so we needed to do an e-scan. And so the city was our partner and our supporter. And so they put out an RFP for a bid for a company to come together and do the e-scan. And so the city has a very strict sort of way of how they measure the interviews, the budget, the paperwork, the report, that kind of thing. And as a committee, we sat down and said, can we still do those things, but realign them? So most points went to the report and the budget. And so we said, can we change that to the interviews? So because we're relational people, and we had 11 components that had applied, and we interviewed them all. And we sat down with them, and our committee was made up of equally city, equally community, equally men, equally women. And we were able to ask them questions. And part of the procurement was that they had worked with Indigenous companies before. And so we were able to ask how they worked, what they did, be specific. And so even though that took longer, we ended up with a company that was didn't give a very good report. Their budget was unclear, but their ability to build relationships were, and the work that they've done in the Indigenous community was quite clear that they were quite knowledgeable in that area. And we ended up picking them. If we would have followed with the City of Edmonton sort of process, we weren't even considering that report, that RFP. So, and at the end, we got one of the best e-scans that was ever written. We were able to use that e-scan report to make our business case and to do the concept design and all that kind of stuff. So it was something that we referred to quite a bit. It was well done. And our community's voices were very loud and clear in that e-scan. So yeah, it was a good experience from that standpoint.
And really changing the priorities, like you're saying, the way that this is done, and how wonderfully that turned out is such a fantastic story of how this can work. Yeah. Susannah, any other implementation best practices you've seen or used yourself?
Yeah, so as I mentioned, the policy at the City of Edmonton passed, and then COVID hit like 2 months later. So we were really looking at ways we could work online, and also the reality of procurement. I'm sure all of you have experienced there were less events, less meetings, less under threshold small purchases. But what was going ahead where we saw opportunity was that the City of Edmonton was still putting out requests for proposals for construction and infrastructure development. So our sort of first move there was building a relationship with the Edmonton Construction Association. And again, I know you do that in BC too. So that there were opportunities to reach their members, the construction companies in Edmonton, and to put on webinars and educational opportunities. Again, what is social procurement, and for companies to hear from other leaders and companies who are already doing social procurement and understand it from a business point of view. We also worked with by Social Canada on training. So that role that we could take on to implement to really work with companies, I think worked well. We convened meetings between companies and employment organizations in Edmonton so that they could better understand how to work with employment support organizations, where there were barriers, where we could improve training programs and create opportunities for good jobs through these bids that we're going through on infrastructure and construction. We've also done things like develop lists of social enterprises that companies could access. In Edmonton, we're working on building a social enterprise support network, ABC'd in Alberta. Looked at what resources existed, like Business Link in Alberta has an online directory where you can search for small businesses by who owns the business. So you can find a Black-owned business, an Indigenous-owned business, a woman-owned business, youth-owned business. So really looking at what organizations were out there to help support this work. And now that we're back online, I'm excited to look at implementation with one-on-one events. And we do have an event coming up in March that we're organizing with 4 other organizations here in Edmonton to bring together procurement professionals and suppliers, the social enterprises, the Indigenous-owned business, diverse-owned businesses. And so they have an opportunity to meet one another and build relations, and also talk about some examples of social procurement in Edmonton. So we'll let you know how that goes.
Absolutely. Yeah. And what I'm really hearing from all of you is like the need to allow for the time that this takes, the need to collaborate and find partners in this work, and to really make this intentional and get creative about how it can be done. So fantastic learnings from all of you. I've also heard a bit about sort of measurement and progress tracking. And so Jill, I'd love to hear your perspective on why measurement is an important part of a social procurement program.
Well, I think that when anyone is trying something new, it's key, it's really key for it to be this process, like an iterative process. And ongoing learning and evaluation is critical to be able to really be able to understand if you're being effective. Are you actually moving the needle in your community? Are you leading the way in terms of equity, reconciliation, and climate transitions and these other sustainable goals? And I think that that constant process of learning, of measurement, evaluation, and learning really allows us to pinpoint what is working and how effective we're being and what needs to change, what's not working. And I think that, it's so important to be brave and to test new things. And I think it's so important for local governments to show true leadership in kind of changing systems. And so this is such a great opportunity. But at the same time, you really do need to conduct that evaluation and measurement in order to truly understand your effectiveness and be strategic going forward.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and that's definitely something that BCSPI is supporting members on now. We started last spring with impact measurement tools and frameworks for members to kind of track the collective progression that governments and institutions are making as they implement these policies and see changes in their communities for sure. Karen, is there anything else you're thinking of when you talk about measurement as part of this change in procurement?
You know, one of the things that I was talking about earlier is doing that something differently and having things done relational. And when measuring that, how do you measure it felt good, you know, kind of thing. And because when you're coming from that standpoint, or how do you measure that kind of stuff? And sometimes research has a hard time capturing that. And so, you know, I always think about Indigenous methodology of research. And I think about accountability around collecting that kind of information in that good way. Again, research has always been, and evaluations has always been, I shouldn't say always, but historically, for Indigenous people was always to capture our deficits again, you know, like, and use towards, you know, keeping us sort of oppressed in some ways. So it would be interesting to have data collection and be able to measure the progress that we are entering together as Indigenous people and non-Indigenous people, and being able to really measure that in a way that's, again, through the lens of strength.
Yeah.
And honoring that real vision of who we are as human beings in Canada. So yeah.
Absolutely. Yeah. I'm just going to put out there for everyone who's watching that we are going to be taking some questions from you folks if you've got anything for these speakers. So if you want to start popping those into the chat, we'll keep an eye on that. In the meantime, I wanted to ask about any other opportunities or success stories that you're seeing for using procurement as a tool to address poverty. And Susannah, maybe if you've got anything that comes to mind for you.
Sure. In Edmonton, we have a really strong social enterprise, Redemptive Development, operated by an organization in the west end of the city, Jasper Place Wellness. And specifically, Redemptive Development, because they have quite a few social enterprises, but the one I'll highlight today is Evergreen Recycling. So it's a social enterprise that collects and breaks down mattresses into their component parts for recycling and sale. And they've been able to get a contract with the city of Edmonton. In fact, they did have this contract before the social procurement policy came into place, but it is a great example in that they bring so many great outcomes or benefits with their business. So they're recycling mattresses, they're recycling millions of pounds of material and diverting it from the landfill. But they also have really impressive social outcomes because they train and employ people from the community. They have relationships with different organizations in Edmonton. And the people that they're employing have barriers to employment, and they have this very steady contract and work that they've been doing year in and year out. So that's a success, and one that I think different purchasers can look for in their city. Are there social enterprises that have social outcomes already that they could work with? And if they have a contract with those social enterprises, they'll help that business do more of the good work that they're doing already.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and a lot of social enterprises really have that kind of inclusive employment piece that all three of you have spoken to as an important part of addressing poverty in communities. So definitely a really great thing to look for. I know not every small community has a robust set of social enterprises to work from, but definitely looking at small businesses run by nonprofits, those kinds of things for sure. Any other opportunities or success stories, Jill, that you wanted to highlight?
Well, I always think of like, you know, I know that in BC that we have had a lot of conversations about the whole concept of a living wage. And I think that, you know, for local governments just to actually take that step and be a living wage employer as a first step, you know, and then as a second step, you know, well, part of being a living wage employer is ensuring that your contracts are also, you know, living wage. Any contracted employees are also paid a living wage. And I think if you extend that, if you would extend that to social procurement policies, if you hire companies or accept companies that are also paying a living wage, you know, what you are doing is not contributing to poverty in your community, because you know that all the people that will benefit from these living wage policies will be able to make ends meet and live their lives fully in your community. And that money goes around and around and around in the community as well. So it just, you know, co-generates, there's these multiple benefits that are, you know, economic in nature. And I love, Susannah, what you pointed out just about that it's such a great way to engage the business community in poverty reduction, right? You know, because, you know, again, when we look at addressing poverty, we know that everybody needs to be involved. And the business community sometimes says, well, what can we do? What is our contribution? And I think, you know, linking living wage policies to social procurement and really stimulating that local economy without contributing to poverty is critical.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, thank you. Karen, anything to add on opportunities or successes you've seen? I know you shared that great example with us already.
Yeah. Well, there's lots of examples. I just, they're very small sort of examples of smaller businesses being utilized by purchasers. You know, we have here in the city of Edmonton artists, and they're a collective, and a lot of different purchasers access them to for conferences or for gifting or that kind of thing. There's just so many. I really would like to see social procurement become a place where it trickles down to that far, to the smaller businesses, and really affects the people who are most vulnerable and are experiencing poverty the hardest.
Mm-hmm. Absolutely. Yeah. So I'm not seeing any questions in the chat yet. Would love to invite anyone in the audience to ask a question for these speakers around procurement and poverty. Anything else that's coming up for you in this conversation? I know we had a comment earlier. We've got someone international in the audience from New Zealand saying that they really resonated, Karen, with what you were saying about the barriers to procurement, that it's similar for them. So that's, you know, the universal aspect of this conversation that we're having for sure.
Well, and I think another aspect is like when, you know, we were talking earlier about poverty being complex, right? And so, you know, there's so many things that municipalities are kind of doing already, but when we're thinking about, you know, again, kind of tying it back to the social determinants of health, right? That when you're looking at how, you know, kind of for larger municipalities, investing in housing, investing in food security, investing in community spaces and public parks, investing in childcare facilities. You know, there's so many different, like all of these kind of game changers impact different aspects of poverty. And so to have that kind of that overarching lens and an understanding, you know, of what you as a local government can do, I think is so, or already doing, you know, and how you can build on that, because that's another thing. There's so many, you know, and I think, Karen, like what you were talking about, like there's, when I think about empowerment, like there's so many good things and positive things already happening. How can we use social procurement to kind of piggyback on those things to strengthen and like as an empowerment tool, right?
Absolutely. And you're doing some nice sort of tying in the threads of this social or the purchasing power conversations, Jill, because we spoke last year in this series about how procurement could play a role in increasing food security. So there's one of those tie-ins. And our next webinar in this series that we'll be hosting, the event details are coming out very soon, so we'll be sharing them shortly. But the next conversation will be around housing affordability as well as another key piece, and definitely a little more tenuous connection to procurement, but something really worth exploring. I see a hand raised from Jennifer. Feel free to, yeah.
Hello, can you hear me all right?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Excellent, fantastic. Thank you so much for this. This is wonderful. And I see many familiar names along the attendees. So this is exciting that we could all get together. I really appreciate what you've said, and I completely agree with what you in your positions and on what you've been expressing, but I'm hoping you can give me some insight and guidance. So I volunteer a lot in the entrepreneurial space across Canada, and I meet with various different groups. And when I meet with more, and I'm trying to use my terminology politely and diplomatically, so I apologize if it's not articulate, but if they're more traditional, conservative type of organization that wants to be a part of this change, but can't see the light on how it really can push you into goodness in the sense of their business, the health, the greater cause of it. For example, living wage. They often say, it means I'm going to have to increase my prices dramatically. My customers won't like that. I might have to lay off other staff to compensate so I can give living wage. So can you tell me, it's not a sales pitch, but can you tell me or guide me a way to push them, to encourage them and see that there is a way to do this without impacting negatively on others, more bringing us together in this. Do you see what I'm saying and what I'm asking? So if you have some insight, I would really love to learn. Thank you so much.
Thank you for the question. Jill, I'll let you answer this as well, but I think this is definitely something we hear talking to social enterprises and other suppliers who maybe living wage isn't part of their business model, but they provide other sort of wraparound supports and benefits to their staff. And I think we've had conversations around living wage in BC where some of those, it's not immediate from the number that you see on their updates, but that those wraparound supports and benefits are included in their evaluation of whether a supplier is living wage certified or not. So definitely not like the splashy number or the conversation that we see, but there are, yeah, good conversations around it. And Jill, if you have anything else to add, I think that's great.
I will.
Oh, Susannah. Yeah, go ahead.
Go ahead, Susannah.
And then Jill, we're having exactly that conversation with the Alberta Living Wage Network. Exactly that conversation. So about the fact that, yeah, when we are looking at a living wage, we are considering benefits if the employer provides transit pass, recreation pass, health benefits, that type of thing. So trying to have a broad, not just focus on exactly the number, but look at the broader set of benefits that the employer is bringing. I was just going to quickly answer your question, Jennifer. I think we've had some, I guess, movement and ability to make change through associations or networks of business professionals. Like there's often, for whatever business area, there'll be an association or a network, and they know their membership and have probably gone through processes of bringing through new concepts or ideas to that community and how best to do it. And so I know when we met with the construction industry, they were like, oh yeah, we looked at safety and we saw a lot of changes in the safety area. And then the environmental area, we saw changes. So they could see like procurement, social procurement. This is like another one of those areas where we're going to see change in our industry over a certain number of years. And again, early adopters, there's a couple businesses that may be taking the lead that you can bring out to talk. And we had, like, it was COVID, we had webinars, honestly, but you know, that could be done in person too. But I think it's helpful when people hear from their own peers from other businesses how they've implemented, what successes they've seen, and they may be able, I know the businesses we work to would speak to maybe their millennial employees really appreciated the company having social value, or it could be social procurement helps them because they're having worker shortages, and so they're reaching new markets or something like that. And the same on the living wage front, maybe that's helped them with the employee retention. So when you have a business speak to other businesses, they can help explain maybe what benefits it's brought to their own business, and that's going to have a stronger impact than hearing from someone else. Anyway, sorry, Jill, to have interrupted.
No, that's great, because it really kind of supports what I was going to say. And I was just going to say that, I think that when we look at change or changing practices, part of that is fear of change, right? So, and fear is generally, kind of generated by assumptions. So I think that, as both Susannah and Emma pointed out, like there's a lot of research out there on the actual benefits of, having social investment and or paying a living wage, which includes your benefits package and anything else you're offering your staff. And I think so it's like, how do we help educate the folks that we're working with to help address some of those assumptions or preconceptions or kind of traditional ways of doing things that they think are going to lead to success, and how we can just help them see that if they travel this other road, then they will also be successful. But also to look at what constitutes success, and is it relational? Is it, is it kind of more social or kind of broader in nature? So I think we need to just kind of check our assumptions, but also offer resources to help whomever we're working with to overcome those assumptions.
Mm-hmm. Wonderful. That was a great discussion. Thank you for the question, Jennifer. I think just to sort of bring us back to this final piece of the conversation, I would love to ask all three of you to share one concrete action that folks in the audience can take following this discussion to try to push this needle on addressing poverty, and sort of really how this can happen. So maybe Karen, let's start with you.
I was hoping you wouldn't.
I can come back to you if you want.
I guess it's so basic, but and that's why I was hoping you wouldn't, because the other two could give some very constructional kind of changes, but I think I think it's just really reaching out to, and I'll come from the Indigenous perspective, really reaching out to the Indigenous community and building those relationships. And I'm not just talking Indigenous community in general I'm talking about, there's a lot of different associations of businesses, and nationally and locally. And you know, I've sat in a lot of the webinars that have been happening across Canada and listening to them, and you know, they have experience in this stuff. So I mean, it's nothing that we're not used to or that we're used to as Indigenous people. We're used to doing relational stuff. It's been our whole situations in anything we discuss, whether it's business, education, health. We're constantly trying to build relationship and educate people on our Indigenous ways of knowing and being. And, you know, being able to come up with these hybrid models that everybody can sort of live with. So that would be my suggestion.
Mm-hmm. And I think, you know, you're saying sort of that it's a basic, but it's also really crucial. And we've heard it in all of these conversations that relationships are really foundational to this work, and are part of the change in doing procurement in this way, is that relationships really have to be part of the core of what you're doing. So thank you. Yeah. Jill, one concrete action.
Well, just allow the time,
Mm-hmm.
right, to follow up on what you're saying, Karen. I think it's really, really important to, you know, in this busy day-to-day life that we all have, that sometimes it's really important to like for city staff, to have someone dedicated to undertaking the work, and given permission to take the time to do the work that needs to be undertaken, you know. But that kind of buy-in and support needs to come from your administration, your political leaders, and your managers. That staff need to be empowered to be able to be intentional and take the time to do it right. And also, just there's lots of other great examples across Canada to connect with people who are already doing the work and learn from what's working on the ground.
Yeah, great advice. Thank you. Susannah.
And I think I'm echoing what we've been saying, but just look at the resources in your community, town, city that may already be out there that'll help you connect with, be it social enterprises or co-ops or small businesses, because then you can reach a larger group of people, speak at an event that they have, let people know about procurement opportunities, or I guess I'm saying try and go to where people are, as opposed to maybe assuming that people will always come to your procurement system process. You know, if you can get out and connect with people, and as I said, I'm not suggesting one-on-one because that would be very time consuming, but to those professional associations or networks, or there's also accreditation networks that will accredit different types of businesses too.
Mm-hmm. Wonderful. Well, thank you, all three of you, for sharing your insights and experiences today. It's a really fantastic conversation, and hopefully folks in the audience are feeling really inspired to take action and help to move this needle a little bit further in their work. So again, thank you all for your time. Thanks everyone for being here today. We'll be sharing a recap sometime next week with the key takeaways in the recording from today, as well as updates on our next scheduled purchasing power events. So have a great rest of your days, everyone.
Great, thanks.
Thanks, Emma.
Thank you.
Bye.